Everybody, there's Eric Steele, man. All right. All right. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and get started. There's one, two, three, four. Cool. Well, I appreciate everybody hanging out with me tonight on your Friday. And Professor Dan, thanks for coming too. All right. So this is a topic that I've talked to you a little bit about lately, but we'll go ahead and get started here. So if I can get this thing to work, let me see. There we go. All right. As an individual who attends public classes, physical safety is a high concern, not only for myself, but for many fellow students and faculty as well. Mass casualty events resulting from shootings at public schools have significantly increased in recent years. Each time that one of these tragedies occur, political debates regarding the issue of gun control become a hot topic. However, passing gun control laws are simply not enough to stop the next tragedy from occurring. I will now explain how the Parkland school shooting sparked a new age debate of gun control and safer school policy. It was Valentine's Day, 2018. A former mentally disturbed student walked into a Parkland high school, killing 14 students and 3 faculty members, making it the deadliest high school shooting in American history. Now, aside from this sad statistic, the event has brought the issue of this, gun control and safer school policy, into focus. Now, if you are like me, then you have been concerned about a school shooting at your school at one point or another. That's okay, you're not alone. In fact, the Pew Research Center reported that after the Parkland school shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, 57%, more than half, of teenagers between the ages of 13 to 17 feared that a school shooting could happen at their school. Their parents were also in agreement with them. Now, because so much life was lost at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, parents of victims became activists, and they used their voices to demand change in what many call a broken system. I will now explain both sides of the debate that resulted from the Parkland shooting and why outlawing assault weapons will not stop the next incident from occurring. Now, it's logical to state that differing viewpoints within advocacy resulting from the same circumstances after Parkland have been initiated by the parents of the victims. Fred Guttenberg, whose 14-year-old daughter Jamie was killed in the tragedy, he's become a leading anti-gun activist with the desire to have assault-style weapons banned in their entirety. Philip and April Shintrup, whose 17-year-old daughter Carmen was killed in the same tragedy, share similar sentiments. 100% of audience members that were surveyed prior to this presentation and that have responded agree that banning assault weapons would not prevent the next school shooting from occurring. 4 years after the Parkland tragedy, a former student killed 19 students and 2 teachers at a Uvalde, Texas elementary school using an assault weapon. Now, I argue that banning assault weapons will not prevent the next school shooting from happening because in theory, a criminal or an individual who desires to inflict harm upon another person simply does not care about a tangible law, but rather the outcome of his or her actions. Just as some parents who lost children in the Parkland tragedy have advocated for gun control, other parents have argued for the opposite, fighting for a safer school policy. Max Schachter, who lost his 14-year-old son Alex, has now dedicated his life to becoming a public speaker who speaks to decision makers and leaders that push for a safer school policy. Ryan Petty, whose 14-year-old daughter Elena was killed in the same tragedy, has been a strong voice for training and arming teachers in the hopes of stopping an active shooter if confronted. Andrew Pollack, whose 18-year-old daughter Meadow was killed in the same tragedy, has become a strong voice for common sense safety policy measures within schools, which include securing parameters and properly training security officials. These issues raise valid points of concern, yet they are simply not enough to prevent tragedy. I will now explain why ignoring the warning signs is detrimental to the well-being of students. In the wake of the Parkland tragedy, many, including parents of the victims, have demanded answers as to why this happened. The day following the incident, Lori Aladaff, who lost her 14-year-old daughter Alyssa, stated in a CNN interview, How do we allow a gunman to come into our children's school? The gunman, a crazy person, just walks right into the school, knocks down the window of my child's door, and starts shooting her and killing her. President Trump, you say, what can you do? You can stop the guns from getting into these children's hands. Now, although I sympathize with Lori's feelings over loss in her quest for answers, insinuating that this tragedy was even remotely preventable from then President Trump seems to be hardly reasonable. Just as it's unreasonable to blame Columbine on President Clinton, Virginia Tech on President Bush, Sandy Hook on President Obama, Parkland on President Trump, or Uvalde on President Biden. Prior to this tragedy, the perpetrator released a video on social media stating the following: "I'm going to be the next school shooter of 2018. My goal is to kill at least 20 people." His actions were intentional. His actions were premeditated. And ultimately, his threats were reported to the FBI, but this wasn't enough. And the reason is because the FBI failed to take appropriate action. And as a result, 17 individuals lost their lives. Now, they came out with an apology notice 3 days after the incident. But to my opinion, that's 3 days too late. Andrew Pollack, who was previously referenced, feels that Parkland was preventable in its entirety, especially if all of the warning signs were investigated and properly followed up on in a timely manner. And it's true, the Parkland tragedy would have been prevented in its entirety, not with the banishment of an assault-style weapon, but rather proactiveness from proper law enforcement officials. The Parkland shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School on February 14, 2018, it sparked new debates over gun control and safer school policies. But has there been progress made? I would say no, and the reason is because these types of events continue to happen. Differing ideologies and philosophies on how to prevent the next school shooting have been presented from parents of those who have died, but the common sense factor remains that if warning signs would have been investigated and followed up on, a strong likeliness of mitigating such instances would be plausible. Now the truth is, I should have never delivered this presentation to you tonight, for one simple reason. The shooting at Parkland should have never happened. I shouldn't know the names of 14 kids and 3 teachers who prematurely died there, because this incident was preventable in its entirety if the warning signs would have been followed. Thank you. Now, if I could just have everyone real quick to see that you guys are still here. That's cool. All right. I don't know about Ryan. There he is. Okay. All right, guys.